This is the story of a girl named Savannah Hartfield, and my name is Emily Carter. I'm 27 years old, and what I'm about to tell you happened not too long ago. An event so twisted and cruel that it shattered my trust in the very people who were supposed to protect me. I never imagined my own family could orchestrate something so heartless, but it happened, and it changed me forever. This is a real story, and if you stay with me until the end, you'll see just how far I was willing to go to get my revenge, so grab a seat because every detail matters and nothing is as it seems. Before I begin, please make sure to subscribe, like, and share this video so more people can hear stories like mine. This story is written and edited by Dark Lifeside Diaries. It started with an invitation, one I almost ignored. My cousin Clara had sent me a gilded envelope in the mail sealed with the Hartfield crest, our family's proud symbol that had been passed down for generations. I hadn't spoken to Clara in nearly 3 years, not since our last explosive argument over my father's will. My father, Jonathan Hartfield, was the kind of man who could walk into any room and command respect without saying a word, but he was also the kind who made enemies easily, sometimes within his own family. When he died suddenly from what doctors claimed was a heart attack, I knew in my gut it was more complicated, but the Hartfields didn't talk about complications. They talked about appearances, wealth, and legacy. The will had been read in the grand parlor of Hartfield Manor, and to everyone's shock, the majority of my father's estate had been left to me. Not my older brother Mason, not Clara or her mother Aunt Lorraine, me the youngest. And according to them, the least deserving. That day, I saw hatred in my relatives' eyes masked under forced smiles. The invitation now sitting in my hands was for a family reunion at Hartfield Manor, and the timing was suspicious. I stared at the swirling gold script, feeling the weight of its implication. Why invite me now after years of silence? The front of the card read, "For family, for forgiveness, for the future." The 3 F's, it was so rehearsed it made my skin crawl. I knew better than to believe in sudden reconciliations, but part of me, the part that still clung to the memories of childhood, Christmases in the Great Hall and summers on the estate's sprawling lawns, wanted to see if maybe, just maybe, they had changed. I told myself I'd go, but only to watch, to listen, to confirm my suspicions. On the day of the reunion, I dressed carefully: black silk blouse, tailored slacks, low heels, strong but not ostentatious. The drive up to the manor was as breathtaking as I remembered: winding roads framed by towering oaks whose branches knitted together like a cathedral ceiling. The house came into view, and my breath hitched. Hartfield Manor wasn't just big, it was imposing, with its dark stone walls, ivy creeping up like green veins, and rows of windows reflecting the gray afternoon sky. As I stepped out of the car, I noticed the front doors were already open, as if expecting me. Clara appeared wearing a white dress so pristine it made her look like a ghost. Her smile was too wide. "Emily, you came," she said, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. I hugged her, but my hands stayed stiff. Inside, the parlor smelled faintly of lilac and old books, and the fireplace roared as if it were midwinter. Though it was late September, the rest of the family was scattered around the room, each with a glass of wine in hand. Aunt Lorraine was by the window, speaking in low tones to Mason, who glanced at me and then quickly looked away. My Uncle Gerald gave me a brief nod but didn't move closer. I felt like prey stepping into a lion's den. Dinner was served in the grand dining hall, where the long mahogany table could seat 20, but tonight held only 12 of us. The crystal chandelier above glimmered like 1,000 eyes watching. Conversation was polite at first, questions about my work, my apartment in the city, but every so often someone would slip in a comment about the estate, about how difficult it must be for me to manage so much alone. By dessert, the mask of civility was slipping. Clara leaned over, her eyes gleaming, and said, "You know, Emily, some things in this family aren't meant to be taken by outsiders." I first fork halfway to my mouth. "I'm not an outsider," I replied, my voice cold. "I'm a Hartfield." She smirked. "We'll see." Later that night, I wandered into my father's old study, needing a moment away from their suffocating stares. The room was untouched since his death. The heavy oak desk, the leather armchair, the shelves lined with books whose spines I knew by heart, but something was different. A faint draft brushed the back of my neck, and when I turned, I saw it. A section of the bookshelf slightly ajar. I pushed it, and it swung open to reveal a narrow passageway descending into darkness. My pulse quickened. Every child in this family had heard whispers about the hidden tunnels beneath the manor, built during Prohibition to hide liquor, or so the story went. But why was it open now? I stepped inside, my phone's flashlight cutting through the black. The air was cool and damp, and the walls were lined with old wooden crates, some labeled with dates from decades past. As I ventured deeper, I heard Footsteps above, muffled but unmistakable in voices. "Claire's among them tomorrow," she said. "We make her understand." My blood turned to ice. They were planning something, and whatever it wasn't reconciliation, it was retribution. I backed out of the passageway, quietly closing the shelf just as the study door creaked open. Mason stood there, his eyes unreadable. "Looking for something?" he asked. My mind raced for an excuse, but before I could answer, he smiled a slow, deliberate smile that told me he knew exactly what I'd found. That night in the guest room, they'd assigned me. I locked the door and sat on the bed, heart pounding. I knew now that I wasn't just here for a reunion, I was here for a reckoning. And if they wanted a fight, they were about to learn I wasn't the timid little cousin they remembered. The next few days after that chilling conversation with Aunt Linda felt like a fog. I couldn't shake each moment heavy with the weight of the truth I just learned, and yet I had to keep acting normal around Dad, pretending. I didn't know he was the one who had destroyed Mom's life, stolen her dignity, and turned my childhood into a carefully constructed lie. I could still hear Aunt Linda's voice echoing in my head, telling me about the money, the betrayal, the way he manipulated everyone to see Mom as unstable when in reality, he was the one pulling the strings, controlling the narrative, and making sure no one questioned his actions. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized just how far his control had reached, even into my own mind. I started remembering all the times he made me doubt Mom, how he'd plant little seeds like, your mother gets confused. Or, "Don't listen to her when she says things about me, she's not well," and I hated myself for believing him for so many years, for letting him twist my perception until I saw my own mother as unreliable, when she was actually trying to protect. But now with the truth in my hands, I knew I couldn't just let it go. I had to find a way to get justice for Mom, and I had to be smart about it because Dad wasn't just some careless liar. He was calculated, cold, and would destroy anyone who got in his way, even me. So I started small, combing through old family documents, photos, anything I could find that might prove Aunt Linda's story, and I began noticing things I had overlooked before, like the fact that all of Mom's personal accounts had been closed right before their divorce, the way her signature on certain legal documents looked shaky and almost forged, and the sudden transfer of a large sum of money to a business account under Dad's name that I had never heard about. The pieces were falling into place, but they were dangerous pieces, the kind that if Dad found out I had them could make me his next target, and I had no doubt he'd be capable of ruining my life just like he did Mom's. At the same time, I started watching him more closely, noticing how he seemed to have this subtle control over everyone around him. The neighbors respected him. His colleagues at work treated him like a leader, and even when he was being rude or dismissive to people, they seemed to brush it off like it was nothing, as if he had some invisible hold on them, which made me realize just how skilled he was at manipulation. One night, while going through boxes in the attic, under the excuse of cleaning out old junk, I stumbled upon a locked metal case hidden under layers of blankets, and my heart pounded so hard I could barely hear anything else as I pried it open with a screwdriver, revealing folders of legal paperwork, letters, and most disturbingly photographs of Mom that seemed to be taken without her knowing, some of her in the house, looking anxious, others of her meeting someone at a cafe, with dates and times scribbled on the back. I didn't understand why he had them, but something about the secretive way they were stored told me they were important, maybe even incriminating. Before I could dig further, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs, and panic shot through me as I shoved the papers back, locked the case, and kicked it under the blankets. Just as Dad appeared in the doorway with that familiar cold smile, saying he thought he heard something and wanted to check in. I forced a casual laugh, telling him I was just looking for old photo albums, but the way his eyes lingered on me for a moment before he left made my skin crawl, like he knew exactly what I'd been doing. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, not just by Dad, but by someone else too, because I started noticing little things: my bedroom door slightly open when I was sure I'd shut it, my phone battery draining faster than normal, the sense that someone had been in my car when I wasn't using it. It got to the point where I began sleeping with my door locked and keeping my phone in another room at night, afraid that every word I said might be listened to. I decided I needed someone on my side who wasn't family, someone Dad couldn't influence, so I reached out to a former classmate, Megan, who had become a paralegal, and when I told her a watered-down version of what I had learned, she immediately offered to help me discreetly. Megan was cautious but determined, telling me to make copies of everything I found and store them somewhere Dad couldn't access, and so over the next few weeks, Every time Dad was out, I would retrieve a few documents from the attic case, scan them at Megan's office after hours, and then return them before he came home. It was nerve-wracking. But with every file I copied, I felt a little more in control, as if I was quietly building the weapon I'd eventually use to bring him down. Still, I knew information alone wasn't enough. I needed proof that couldn't be explained away or dismissed as misunderstanding, something that tied him directly to fraud or abuse, and I didn't have it yet. That's when Megan suggested something risky, going through his office at work, because if he kept anything truly damning, it would likely be somewhere he felt secure. At first, I dismissed the idea as too dangerous, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized she was right. If I was going to end this, I couldn't be timid. So we started planning, figuring out when he'd be away on business, how to get access to his office without triggering suspicion, and what to look for once inside. The plan was set for the following Thursday when he'd be in Chicago, and in the meantime, I tried to keep up appearances at home, laughing at his jokes during dinner, pretending I was too busy with work to have time for anything else, while inside every fiber of my being was bracing for what was to come. Little did I know Thursday would be the day everything changed, not just my understanding of Dad, but of the danger. I was truly I barely slept that night, my mind replaying the image of my father's bloodied face and the smug expression on Uncle Brian's lips when the cops walked away, like nothing had happened. But somewhere between the waves of anger and grief, a decision hardened inside me. This wasn't going to end with whispered accusations or drunken confessions at family gatherings. I was going to burn his entire world to the ground piece by piece until he knew exactly what it felt like to lose everything, and the first step was gathering proof no one could ignore. So the next morning I called Jake, an old high school friend who now worked as a private investigator, and though I hadn't spoken to him in years, he didn't hesitate when I explained that I needed eyes and ears on Brian's business, his movements, and most importantly his finances, because I knew if I followed the money, I'd find the skeletons that would make even his powerful friends back away. Over the next few weeks, Jake uncovered a gold mine, offshore accounts, shell companies, and the names of mistresses, shady property deals tied to gangs enough to ruin him 10 times over. But I couldn't just hand this to the authorities. Yet not until I had the perfect moment to release it in a way that would destroy not just his freedom, but his reputation and the loyalty of the people he controlled. So I played along at family dinners, smiling sweetly, pretending to have moved past the tragedy, even volunteering to help plan my cousin Laura's upcoming wedding that Brian was paying for, because I knew it would gather every influential person in his orbit under one roof and give me the stage I needed. Meanwhile, I planted seeds of doubt within his circle, casually letting slip concerns about missing funds to his business partners, hinting to his wife, Aunt Marlene, that I'd seen him with a much younger woman in a hotel lobby, which I actually had, thanks to Jake's photos, and watching with quiet satisfaction as her smiles grew tighter and her trust began to crack. But the most satisfying moment came when Jake handed me a recording, Brian drunk and careless, admitting to paying off the cops the night my father died, his voice slurred but clear enough for anyone to understand. And though my hand shook when I played it back, it wasn't from fear, it was from the knowledge that the endgame was finally in sight. As the wedding approached, I built my plan like a general, preparing for battle, scheduling an unplanned video montage for the reception under the guise of a heartfelt tribute to family moments. And with Jake's tech skills, we embedded the damning evidence, the offshore bank transfers, the photos of mistresses, and finally the drunken confession, so it would play right in the middle of the evening when champagne was flowing and cameras were everywhere. I wasn't just aiming for shock, I wanted to make sure no one could ever unsee what they were about to watch, to ensure that every gasp, every dropped fork, and every horrified face would be burned into Brian's memory forever. But in the days leading up to the wedding, something unexpected happened. Brian started getting paranoid, calling me late at night to ask if I'd heard any rumors, warning me about enemies trying to smear his name, and I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing as he unknowingly described me, his own niece, as the phantom threat haunting his every step. The night before the wedding, I stayed at Laura's place to help with last-minute details, but in truth I was making final checks on the laptop and projector, rehearsing the exact moment I'd slip the file into the presentation without anyone noticing. And though my hands were steady, my heart was pounding with a mixture of rage and anticipation, because I knew that tomorrow, in front of his entire empire, Uncle Brian's perfect life was going to crumble into dust, and he'd finally understand what it felt like to be powerless. I couldn't believe that after all these months, every single move I'd made it finally led to this moment. The night air was crisp, the autumn wind rattling the bare branches outside, but my heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. I was standing in the very same hallway where almost a year ago everything in my life had shattered. This was where my father had collapsed after learning what my uncle had done, where my mother had screamed, where our family's trust had been burned to ashes. Now it was where I would end this war once and for all. I had uncovered every paper, every hidden account, every recording, but it wasn't enough to just have the evidence. I wanted him to look me in the eye when his empire fell apart. My Uncle Richard was sitting at the dining table staring at me like I was some naive girl who didn't understand the real world. He smirked, swirling a glass of expensive whiskey, thinking he still had the upper hand. "You think you've won, Emma?" he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his. "No, Uncle Richard. I don't think I've won. I know I have." And that's when I dropped the thick folder of documents onto the table. Bank records, forged signatures, offshore transfers, and emails he thought he had erased. His smirk faltered just a flicker, but I saw it. I saw the crack in his armor. Then, without breaking eye contact, I pressed play on my phone. The recording of his drunken confession filled the room. Every word echoed through the house, every damning sentence like a nail sealing his coffin. He lunged for my phone, but I stepped back, holding it just out of reach. "It's already been sent to the FBI," I said calmly. His hand froze midair, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes, not the fear of losing money, but the fear of losing control, of losing everything. Minutes later, the red and blue lights reflected off the walls, and heavy footsteps filled the hallway. Federal agents burst in, surrounding him, reading him his rights. My mother appeared in the doorway, tears streaming down her face, her hand covering her mouth. We stood together, watching as Richard was handcuffed and dragged out of the house. He glanced back once, but I didn't look away. I wanted him to know that this was the face of the girl he had tried to destroy. When the door finally shut and the sirens faded into the distance, it was as if a weight had been lifted from my chest. My father, who had been bedridden for months, came into the room, slowly leaning on a cane, but his eyes were brighter than I had seen in years. He hugged me tightly, whispering, "You saved us, Emma." But it wasn't just about saving my family. It was about reclaiming our dignity, our lives, our future. In the weeks that followed, the headlines exploded. Richard's empire crumbled, his assets were seized, and every person he had wronged came forward. My mother reopened her bakery, my father started consulting again, and I began writing my story. I wanted people to know that no matter how powerful someone seems, no matter how small they make you feel, you can still fight back and win. It took me to the darkest places I've ever been, but it also showed me how strong I could be. And now, standing here watching my parents laugh in the kitchen again, I know that the war is over, we won, and I will never let anyone take from us what we fought so hard to protect. Thanks for staying with me through this journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so more people can hear it. This story was written and edited by Dark Lifeside Diaries.